We're going to start shortly. Cody has brought all kinds of artifacts that you can look at during the course and after, during the time. Tools that were worked on during the mines, lanterns, helmets. He's got a little bit of everything, lots of books. And that'll all be on display next week down at the Viewmont Mall, I'm sure.
I brought a laser pointer for this. Remember last time?
How about that? I don't need my stick?
Nope.
Modern technology. I don't need to use the stick. How about that? It's gone by the way of modern technology. I don't know if we're going to have too many more people coming, so I think we'll get ready to get started. All right, so I'm sure everybody knows that there's two types of coal, bituminous coal and anthracite coal. Bituminous coal is found in the western part of the state. That was the earliest finding of coal in the 1700s. Long before anthracite was ever discovered around here. There were mines out by Pittsburgh. There were people that found coal out there and traveled it down, tried to use it and travel it down the rivers to sell it. And that's where coal mining really started in America in the 1700s. So you're talking, like almost 300 years of coal being found in the United States.
Oops, can you back it up again just a second? I think it's worth noting that the large black thing on the right-hand side is the northern coal field.
Yeah, I'm getting to that.
I'm sorry.
That's all part of it.
Okay, I didn't want to. That's such a good illustration of it.
This is the first slide, but I just wanted to start by two types: the bituminous and the anthracite. The anthracite is what we're mainly concerned with because that's what was here in this area. And this is what made us famous around here, and this is what fueled the Industrial Revolution in this country, was the anthracite coal. You'll see this is all bituminous coal here, all out in the western part of the state. It's found lots of places in the world. It's found over in England and Wales and Egypt and different places. Anthracite is in Wales and England. This is the anthracite here that we're talking about right here. There's 4 coal fields. There's the northern, the southern, the middle, and the western middle. This northern one right here is where we are. And I will give you a little bit of a background on that. It's 176 square miles of coal up there. The southern coal field, which is down here, is 181 square miles of coal. The western middle, which is this one right here, is 94 square miles, and the eastern middle, which is this one here, is 33 square miles, for a total of 484 square miles of anthracite coal in just our little area over here. In 1749, the proprietary government of Pennsylvania purchased from the Indians of the Six Nations a section of land 125 miles long and 35 miles wide for a sum of 500 pounds, or roughly $2,500. That was a pretty good deal for all that anthracite coal, right? No other part of the country has such a great influence on the building of our nation as the hard anthracite coal found here. The northern coal field, which is where we are, which is what we're talking about right there, it starts at Forest City, approximately just above Forest City, on the northern east side, and extends all the way down to Chick-Shinny, down here, and that's on the southwest side. It's approximately 6 miles wide. All right, 6 miles wide at the widest point. That would be in the Wilkes-Barre area, which is right here. That's the widest point, about 6 miles wide. And the Brisbane shaft of the Glen Alden Coal Company in Scranton is the point of being the highest above sea level. It extends one more bed of coal higher than the second highest, which is the Grassy Island shaft of the Hudson Coal Company. They lie in the Lackawanna Valley, and they extend about 1/2 halfway up the sides of the existing mountains. So if you think about the valley that we're in, and you think of the mountains on both sides of us, roughly halfway up those mountains is where the coal ends. So that's why you'll see all the mining that was done below in the valley was done deep mining, and all the mining on the mountainside was strip mining, because there was not as many mines. There is some that go into those mines. In fact, we have one right here on the West Mountain, on the west side here, done by the West Mountain Coal Company. And the shaft is still up there. It's a slope mine. And we hiked up there, Dale has got some of the pictures from up there when we went up there. And it's a nice long walk uphill, but you can still get into that too. You can still get into that mine. Surprised that they haven't gone in there and taken a lot of pictures from in there, but there are still some places now. I talked to a guy the other day that talked about getting into some of these mines and some of the things that are still in there. And I know there's lots of mines that have so many things left in them. In Scranton, I know there's a place down there that's got a chamber that's probably as big as the Astrodome. It's underwater, most of it, but it's unbelievable how big it is. The anthracite coal and bituminous coal, it's all formed by deposits of trees and shrubs and everything else that was pushed on the ground under pressure during the glacier periods and pressed to form the anthracite coal. It's found at a depth from 2 feet to about 2,500 feet below the surface. There were approximately 21 billion tons of coal existed in the 4 coal regions that we have up here. It's hard to believe that. I mean, it's 5 billion tons were mined out of there. 5 billion tons. The value of the coal mined in Pennsylvania was more than the total of all the gold, silver, lead, and aluminum mined in America in the history of America. So the coal was worth that much money. For every ton of coal produced, 9 tons of air are circulated through the mines when the miners are working in there for ventilation. 20 tons of water were pumped out of the mines for every ton of coal that was mined. And we did have the largest pumps ever in the world for pumping water out of the mines right here in Germany. Right down at the end of Rushbrook Street on the right-hand side, there's a house that sits on a little hill up there, and that was Hog Island. And the pumps that went down in there, they were in a tiled glass that lined. They had a gigantic room in there with the pumps, and they pumped more water. I think it was 33,000 gallons of water a day. It was unbelievable how much they pumped out of there.
And Bruce, where was that pump house at?
It was right, if you came down Rushbrook Street to the Windsor,
Yes.
and instead where the Casey Highway ramp goes up,
Yes.
there used to be a road that went down, and on the right-hand side opposite the Rushbrook Creek, which would be right behind the parking lot for Wayne's Diner. Directly behind that, there's a house that sits up on a hill, and that was Hog Island was there, and that's where the entrance was to the mine. We have a picture of that mine entrance in our museum, and we have a picture of the pumps there, and I think they're in this book, if I remember. Let me see if it's in here. I believe in the back of this book is a picture of the pumps that were in there. Yes, they are. So I'll pass this around. These pumps that are down in the far corner are the pumps, and they had a capacity of 33,800 gallons of water per minute. Per minute, pumped out of that mine. We do have a really nice picture of that over there. Let's see. All right, so now we're at, there were more than 5 million homes heated by coal in America. The coal reserves were estimated at approximately 3 trillion tons. That's total. That's between bituminous and anthracite. 3 trillion tons of coal. Let's see. Half of that 3 trillion tons was low-grade bituminous coal. Bituminous coal burns a lot faster, burns not as efficiently. Anthracite coal is hard to ignite, very hard to ignite, and that's the reason that it wasn't really used early on. We'll get to that in a little bit. But back then, the energy of this country, 48% of it was bituminous coal, 30% was oil, 10% gas. Only 6% of all the energy used in the United States at the early points of I would say in about the 1930s, 37 is what it says here. 6% of it was anthracite, 4% of it was water. Mining started a real downward trend around 1927. The first underground anthracite mine in America was in Carbondale, 1831. That was the very first underground mine for anthracite. Now there were underground mines, if you flip the next page there on the maybe it worked before. There we go. This is a bituminous mine, and this is the way they loaded it. They came out of the sides of the mountain and loaded it in chutes and put it in bags and loaded it onto barges. You can see the bags here and the bags here with the guys loading them. And they brought it out of the mine, out to a little ramp, straight down into chutes. And that's the way the first bituminous coal was mined out around the Pittsburgh area. They would bring it out of the side of a hill, dig it out, because it was soft coal, it was easy to dig. They didn't really make shafts going down in the ground, they just made tunnels. They'd tunnel in, they'd go as far as they thought was safe, and then they'd try to take it to a place where they could sell it and make some money out of it. So that's how they did it. They brought it out of a mine, straight out, straight into a tunnel, and back out. Where here we use shafts and deep mine coal. So the first coal mine for anthracite was 1831 in Carbondale. The first underground mine disaster in America happened also in Carbondale. That was on the 12th of January in 1846. And that was when the roof of the D&H Canal Company's #1 mine fell, trapping approximately 50 workers, resulting in America's first mine hero. The guy's name was Alexander Bryden, and his family, now the Bryden family, lived in Germany for years, right across from the Borough Building. Alexander Bryden clawed his way through nearly a mile of fallen rock and coal to save 30 miners and his son. This mine was located in the area of the 7th Avenue Railroad crossing in Carbondale. The mine engineer's name was James Clarkson. He inspected the mine and ordered additional props to be installed in just before this happened. Didn't get done before it happened. Approximately 100 men and boys, including one John Hosey, that's also a name from German. Hosey founded the mine over in Edgerton, and Hosey still live in Germany. Were in the mine when approximately 60 acres of the roof collapsed. 60 acres collapsed. The collapse sounded like thunder, and the shock was felt throughout the town and the city of Carbondale. The wave of the air coming out of the tunnel, out of the mine, came out of the mouth of the mine and tumbled cars like were matchsticks, the railroad cars. Now these are the railroad cars we're talking about right here. They were cars like that. They could have been empty cars, but I would imagine to be tumbled like that. But the force of the air coming out of the mouth of the mine, when that pushed down, pushed the air out, flipped the cars over right in front of the mine. So at that point, Mr. Bryden, who was a Scotsman, who was topside at the time of the collapse, rushed to the entrance, Miners were coming out of the entrance, the few that were on this side of the collapse, stated that it was impossible for anyone to survive the collapse. Mr. Bride decided to try, and nobody offered any help. Sounds familiar. He wanted to do it, nobody wanted to take the chance to go in. They were all afraid to go in, you know, which makes a lot of sense back then when you see a mine collapse like that. He was the only one, and that was probably because his son was in there and he wanted to go in and get him out. So anyway, he crawled in this opening and on his hands and knees. Then he got to a point where he was laying flat on his stomach and crawling just with his hands. Couldn't even get up on his knees, and crawled just like a worm crawling through the bottom. And he gets down to an opening and he gets to a blockage. Then he finds a small open space and he gets closer and closer to that space. You can't see anything. He's just the light that he has on his helmet. And back then it wasn't a light like we have now and like you see here. It was the flame on top of the helmet where, you know, he could get in there because now the rush of the air came out. Now he can go in with the flame on. It blew all the flame out of their helmets because they were just on top of their hat. It had a little flame. That's what they were able to look by. So he comes out and into this opening, gets to a small opening and hears noise. So then he gets through the noise and starts moving a couple of rocks to make it big enough for him to go in there. He gets in there and discovers 30 miners and his son. Brings them out, follow me to safety, takes them all, gets the ones up that can go and tells them how to go, has the light, guides them through, everyone stays behind him, he gets them all out of there. And then he gets out there and they told him there's one more man in there in a different chamber. So he goes back in the mine, back in, crawls all the way back in, gets into another chamber where he finds this guy sitting with his back up against the wall. And from what the records that we have here is he was sitting with a broken back. He placed him on his back and crawled back out with this man on his back holding him around the neck or the shoulders and crawled back out and got this man out of the mines. Mr. Hosey, who was in a different chamber, he spent 2 days clawing with his hands, trying to find his way out of a different chamber, found his way out through a different area of that same mine. And after 2 days, he sees a shimmering light, and he runs toward the light, shouting, and he ran right into a coal car and knocked himself out because he couldn't see where he was going, and just the light. Ran into a coal car, knocked himself out, and then he sat in there. When he came back to, didn't say how long he was there, but he was knocked out. He followed the tracks and just followed the tracks, the railroad car tracks, back out to safety. 14 men were killed in this mine. 8 bodies were never found. Mr. Bride lived in Carbondale until he died in 1854 at 55 years old. His son Andrew worked as a superintendent for 50 years for the Pennsylvania Coal Company. Also died in Carbondale in 1904, 74 years old. John Hosey died in Scranton in 1881, 69 years old. He built railroads, worked as a mine superintendent, and owned mines in Lackawanna County, which would be the Edgerton mine, which is right up here in Archibald. And we have a book of that mine in our museum. Dale Keklak worked with Pepper Krenitsky on writing a book on that mine. And from what I understand, there are no copies left to be sold. So if you didn't get one, the only way you can get one now is to stop at the museum and sit and read it. So once we get the museum open, you'll be able to come back over there and sit and look at that book or take pictures of it or whatever. Let's see what's on the next slide. I have a lot of slides that we'll go through, and hopefully it'll be short. This is the way coming out of a straight shaft mine where they would bring out the coal with the mules, and the guy would ride out with it. This is an early mine, and the mules played a big part of it. Let's see here.
I have a question.
Question.
Why did they mine the bituminous coal and bring it right out and bag it, but they had to do all kinds of process with the anthracite coal.
Because it was deeper in the ground. Bituminous, like you could go in and right into a tunnel and mine that coal right into the side of a mountain and pull it out, because it was a softer coal, it was easier to dig. And the anthracite mine was deeper. It went down, it's like 2,500 feet down in the ground. So there was rows of rock, then there was coal, and then there'd be more rock, and then there'd be more coal. So they'd have to go through different layers of earth and dirt. So they have to secure everything and make shafts going down in. There's three types of, there is a tunnel, you can tunnel into the side of a mountain, which is done here in this valley. Up on the upper part, they did the dragline type because it was more efficient later on, easier for them to get the coal out. But in the early days, they did everything with shafts. Now, the first shaft in German was 1857. It was right where Rapid Pallet is now on the east side of German. That was when the shaft was put in German, 1857. So we were a little bit later than Carbondale, which was 1831. I think Archibald was a little bit earlier, but German, we didn't get coal in a shaft sunk until 1857 in German. Just a few little facts here of different collieries, so I'll give you a little bit. Edgerton was in Archibald, Keystone Colliery was in Mayfield, the Glenwood Breaker was in Mayfield, the Erie Colliery was in Mayfield, Carbondale Township, the Rushbrook Coal Company, 1894 was the West Mountain Coal Company, which is in German on the east side. That was up until 1898. It burned in 1929. The Motley Coal Company was also in Mayfield. Jones and Simpson Mine in Archibald. There was a Whippoorwill Mine, which I don't know where it's at. I have to research that more, but there was a Whippoorwill Mine. Leggett's Creek Colliery, Dixon City Colliery, the Marvin Breaker, Von Storch Breakers, Story Creek Breaker in Jessup, Oliphant had a breaker. They're all in that book that was passed around. You see all of the different breakers that Hudson Coal Company had. Okay, so the German pump station, the pumps were 250 feet below the surface. They're in a room 200 by 35, reinforced with steel girders, encased in concrete, built in solid rock. 4 pumps were connected together to pump the 33,000 gallons per minute, or close to 2 million gallons per hour. It cost $1.5 million to build it. It was built in 1923. In 1942, here in Germany, we had a rescue of 7 mules that were trapped during a flood in 1942. They were 60 feet underground, trapped by the flood waters of the Lackawanna River. The miners floated hay and food on a raft into the mules. The mules had these are the names of the mules. One was Steve, one was Calvert, one was Bones, one was Tony, one was Fanny, one was Pete, and one was Tim. And another mule, Maggie, was housed in another area of the mine, drowned. There was one mule that drowned here in the mines. The Hudson Colliery here closed in 1945. So some of the books that I have here, these are all Hudson Coal Company books. They list a lot of the collieries, and some of them are after the German mine closed. So it'll show pictures. You can look at these. It show pictures of all the collieries and where they were. So the Hudson Coal Company was the biggest one in our area, of course. There was 650 miles of underground track, 275 electric locomotives, 1,100 mules, 5,000 chambers. They moved 45,000 tons of coal per day. There were enormous underground lakes covering hundreds of acres. We have another family in German, Dominic Esgro, operated a mine with his 3 sons, Harry, Joe, and John, above Ellsworth Park, and Joe is still alive here in German. Anthracite was really, really hard to burn, and that was the reason that anthracite took forever to catch on. And we're going to get into a little bit of how this happened and how the coal was found and where it was found and how they ended up getting it to market and everything else. A lot of the anthracite started really getting to market down south towards Machunk, which is Jim Thorpe. By 1840, there were only 6 furnaces, and these were blacksmith furnaces. By 1840, there were only 6 furnaces burning coal to use by the blacksmiths. They were the only people that could actually get the anthracite to light and be usable, because they had the bellows and it needed the air to keep that fire going. And a lot of it was found by accident. There was a guy searching for coal, and he was down in the southern fields down by that way, and he was up underneath a rock, and he lit a fire to keep warm at night because he was searching for this coal, and he was underneath a ledge, and he lit a campfire to keep himself warm. And when he woke up in the morning, the fire was glowing and burning really hot. And when he removed everything, he found out it was the coal that ignited. And because of the fire that he put on top of it, ignited the coal. So he broke off some of that coal and took it to some people that knew a little bit about it to try to see what he could do. And hopefully I'll read a little bit about that down here as we're going. The only way to market this coal was to haul everything by teams of horses, because there was no other way to get it to market. So back when we first started getting coal around here, they would have to haul iron to make rails. Iron was made in Scranton, and the foundries in Scranton, and then it was made and hauled up towards here to make the gravity railroad, which gravity railroad was our main source in this area to get the coal out of the area. And Dr. Powell gives a long speech about the gravity railroad, and the gravity railroad worked by, pulling the cars up the hill and then gravity down to the next hill and pulling off the next hill and gravity to the next hill. And that's how the coal got to the canals. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history of the canals, because they came by rail and then all the way down to Holmesdale and then by canal to New York City. But it all started in 1853. The Lackawanna Iron and Coal was formed, with major partners being the Sheldons and the Scrantons, and Mr. John Howland being the largest stockholder. I have a little bit here. It's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Of course, it's just something I wrote. The vast businesses that sprang up everywhere, coal supported many families and communities: barbershops, meat markets, clothing stores, hotels, bars and restaurants, just to name a few, lumber yards, stables, farms, bridles and wagons, repair businesses, blacksmiths, even funeral homes. And there was a lot of need for funeral homes during the mining days. German alone had over 4,000 residents here in German. That's how, there's only 2,000 now, so double the size of what the town is now, back in the day. The bad part of it was the men and boys were forced to work under terrible conditions. Young boys as pickers, women picked coal from the slag piles to heat their homes and stoves. Injuries and death were from mine collapses and other avoidable accidents. Forced to work long hours in the dark, cramped tunnels, working in damp and sometimes wet conditions with heavy drills and equipment. No power tools, all hand tools, drills and loading carts. This, you'll see in one of the pictures, is what they used to drill into the mines by hand. That's how they drilled into the coal to get the dynamite charges into the coal so that they could get the coal out. So everything was done by hand. There was nothing done with air, with electricity, with anything like that. This is the type of cables that they would use. This came from one of the mines. This is the kind of cables that they would use to pull the cars out of the mines. And these are the types of spikes that were used in the major railroads that hauled the coal back and forth. And this is what they wore on their helmets to light their way into the mines. And you'll see some of them over there on the helmets. This is what we used in our homes. Coal pail, a shovel. That's what we put into the coal stoves. These are rollers. This came out of the mine. These are wooden rollers with the steel through it that drove different parts of the coal. They would also drill with a drill like this against their body to drill into the sides of the timbers, and then drive wooden pegs in to support the timbers. Nothing was done with, we don't have DeWalt drills back in those days. Everything was done. This is what they used in the forges to hold the iron. I have some other spikes in a couple other places. Dynamite, of course, was used quite a bit. This is an explosive box. We have a couple of these in our museum. The powder mills right down here in German, 1864, was making all the dynamite. These are from the furnaces. This is open and close your dampers in the furnaces, in the coal furnaces. And this is what the miners carried their drinks in when they went in. And Cody has a lunch pail over there and some of the lights. These are the small spikes that would be in the small rail cars coming out of, like into the gravity railroad and coming out of the mines. These small little spikes into the rails. And we do have pictures of the rails over there as well. You want to go to another slide there, Doug? Is this one of the lamps?
It's like a torch that they would have carried.
Right, this is like a fuel, would be used with fuel in it and light it just like a tiki torch lights now with
like
the
whale
fuel.
oil.
And they use whale oil and things like that. But this is what they would use to light their way going into the mines.
Coal car tag.
And there's a tag from one of the coal cars. Cody's one of the biggest collectors of memorabilia in the area. For somebody that young, it's really amazing. All right, so what do we have here? This is the anthracite coal fields in Pennsylvania. This shows the depth of the coal and everything, so you can't really get a good picture of that. Let's go to the next one. All right, here you see the lanterns on their heads with the flames. That was just a tube, just like he had there, with the fuel oil in it, and they would light it. And you can see that this is carrying the dynamite on their shoulders to go down into the mines. And this is an early photo, and the reason you can see it's an early photo, if you look at their feet, they don't have a right foot and a left foot. Because the shoes didn't have right foot and left foot back then. Because during the Civil War times, their boots were, you put your foot on your boot and they're both the same. There wasn't a right foot and a left foot. So when you see these cowboy movies and they show a guy and they say he has the wrong boot on the wrong foot, it had to be late in the 1870s, 1880s, because up until the 1860s, there was not a right and left foot shoe. So these are early photos. Go to the next one. All right, here you see the same type of thing. You see the miners getting ready to go into, this is their elevator shaft to go down in. And you see young boys and the older men. You see a lot of boys here, and the boys would go in and pick the coal. So that was part of the bad that I was talking about. All right, so we're going back to the blacksmiths a little bit and how they were using coal. They were using coal back in 1775. This guy that, all right, we're going back to the 1700s here in coal. 1769, Obadiah and Daniel Gore used coal successfully in their workplace in Wilkes-Barre in a blacksmith shop. 1769. So that's long before coal was found up here in our area. They showed this to other blacksmiths who preferred to use the anthracite over wood because of its high heat and long burning. In 1776, Wyoming Valley anthracite was shipped by Dunham boats carrying 20 tons of coal to Harris Ferry, which was later became Harrisburg, Harris Ferry, and then by wagon overland to Carlisle to be used in the forges of the gunsmith manufacturing arms for the Continental Army. So coal came out of our anthracite region to fuel the Continental Army during the Revolution. And that's not even mentioned when we talk about coal up here. And we were actually fueling the forges to make the arms for the Continental Army in the 1700s. A lot of this coal came from Matthias Hollenbeck's mine at Mill Creek, which is just a little bit above Wilkes-Barre. In 1791, Philip Gintner, he was a miller of the Mahoning Valley, was searching for conglomerate rock with quartz to make millstones. He discovered the black stones he believed to be coal that he had heard about and broke off a piece and took it to his friend, a blacksmith, who put it in his charcoal fire. When it ignited, he knew he had found the coal. He went back, took some more of this coal to Colonel Jacob Weiss. He was the most prominent settler in the area at the time. Blacksmiths had been using the coal since 1775. He took the coal to Philadelphia to have it assessed in value and contacted his cousin, Michael Hillegas. He was the first treasurer of the United States, and Charles Christ, his brother-in-law. The group met with John Nicholson, who was the Comptroller General of Pennsylvania at the time, and other merchants, and they agreed to form a company. On February 13th, they held their first meeting of the Lehigh Valley Mine Company. By the 1790s, more than 1,000 tons was being consumed in Philadelphia alone. Much of this came from Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, not from here. The company purchased 10,000 acres from Mauchunk to Tamaqua. Then down by Pottsville, this is the story, I believe, yes, the story I was telling you. Necco Allen, in 1790, after a day of hunting, lit a fire under a ledge and fell asleep. Sometime during the night, he was awakened by a bright light when he discovered his campfire was on a bed of coal that had ignited. He prospected for coal, obtained warrants for coal land, operated a sawmill, a tavern, and a small mine. And the biggest problem with the hard coal was getting it to ignite. So without some sort of a draft. That is why blacksmiths could use it, and there weren't for anybody else using it at the time. Dr. Thomas James of Philadelphia used it to heat his living room, but it failed to convince other people about it. He used it, he set up a draft system in his own house so that he could use it in his house, but nobody else ever caught on to it. In 1812, Colonel George Shoemaker carted 9 wagon loads down to Philadelphia. He tried to talk to anyone who would listen, but he only sold 2 wagons and was almost lynched as a swindler when they could not get the anthracite to ignite. He gave away all the remaining 7 loads and said, "Take it, I don't want nothing to do with it, and I'm going back to where I came from." The first important breakthrough in the Wyoming Valley was in 1788 when Judge Jesse Fell of Wilkes-Barre used anthracite in the manufacturing of nails. Most of his experiments were done at night to avoid scorn from his neighbors. Finally, in 1808, he devised an L-shaped grate made of iron bars spaced several inches apart, which he inserted into his fireplace. He placed wood and then lit it and placed coal on top. To his amazement, when he awoke, the fire was still burning with a warm glow. In 1807, Jebediah and John Smith from Connecticut, who had purchased coal lands at Plymouth, took 55 tons down the Susquehanna, but finding no buyers, dumped the load at Columbia. After Fell's discovery, however, the next year they sent several more loads down, finding buyers at $10 per ton, and they moved down to the Chesapeake Bay, to Baltimore, and then to New York City. Their success grew to more than 100,000 tons of coal sold by 1830. Josiah White and Erskine Hazards, with investors, started the Lehigh Navigation Company and the Lehigh Coal Company in 1818. So that's still before we got any coal up in this area going anywhere. building a series of sleeves and dams to control the flow of water on the Lehigh. So they were building a canal before we had our canals up here. Okay, so thus the first canal company in 1824. They shipped 9,000 tons of coal between the Lehigh and the Schuylkill companies. In 1828, more than 77,000 tons were shipped. By 1830, more than 200,000 tons a year were moved. With the purchase in 1829 of the Stourbridge Lion, now we're talking about something new. The reason they went to get the Stourbridge Lion was because they needed a way to move the coal faster than trying to get it onto where they were going with the gravity railroad and with the water. They thought they could make the rails work. So in 1829, the Stourbridge Lion was brought. It was to move coal from, that was the beginning of, I would say, the start of the Industrial Revolution here in America. Well, the rails would not support the heavy loads at that time, nor would the engine pull them. The idea of what they wanted to do with the Stourbridge Lion opened up all of the innovation of the rail travel. So now if you flip it, another slide there, and we get to page 9 here, we're going into transportation. This here, you'll see, there is no column supporting this at all. It's just an open tunnel going straight in. This was tunnel mining, which was not shaft mining or slope mining. This is a tunnel mine, straight in. No shoring, nothing. Very dangerous work. Miners were inspecting a crack. It says right here, it's inspecting a crack in the roof of the gangway. All right, flip that. And here you see, this is the boss of the mines, and he is coming in here to do an inspection of the gas in the mines to make sure it's safe to let other miners come in. So he's got his lamp and he's lighting it, and he's going around to look to see if there's any gas in the mines. Okay? And here you see what we talked about with the cable. You see the miner coming out, the cable here, you see the columns here. This is what supported the mine, and that's just pulling a straight cable out. They had 2 sets of tracks, and pulling the miner back out of the coal. Go to the next one, because we've got a lot of slides here. This is a slope mine, where they're pulling the car up. That's a bigger version of that coal car there, built the same way. And you see the big chains that came out of here that pulled it out. And you know, as you see, this is an early one too, because you see the lamps on the top. They're not lights; they're flames. So this is another early one. This would be before we really had a lot of lights. I'll go to the next one. And here you see the miners just working, digging out with a shovel. You see the man there with the exact same tool I just showed you right here. There, he's got hand on one side, the loop is on the other side, and there's the long shaft drilling into the mines to get ready. And you can see they have the same flame helmets on the top, not the light helmets or the carbide lamps that we knew a little bit later. All right, so flip that again. Now here you see the same thing. There's the same tool, drilling into the mines. That's how they work. They have the same helmets on with the same flame. You can see the great big bed of coal. That's all anthracite coal. They would drill a hole in it, stick the dynamite in it, get out of the way, blast it, coal would come down. There'd be a rail on, 2 rails on the ground. They'd back the car down to it, and they loaded it all by hand. Everything was done by hand. So flip that. And here you see, this is later on with a pneumatic air drill. You can see a different type of light on his helmet. He's drilling into the side of the shaft with an air gun, air drill. There's the long shaft there, and he's got the one going into the side, and they're doing the same thing. You see a solid rock surface up top. This is all coal. He's drilling into it to blast that out. Now here's the coal cars. This is an early one. This is the guy that's stopping, it's called sprags. A piece of wood, sticking it in the wheel of the car to stop the cars from rolling. Now, a lot of people were hurt, a lot of young boys were hurt, spragging the coal cars, sticking the wood in the wheels to stop the cars to keep them from going. And on this real steep grade, that's how they used to keep the coal cars from moving. Now here you see all the tools, all the pipes, you see the rails on the ground going into the coal, solid top into the coal. They're going to drill back into that area back there, blast it, and when it comes out, they'll have a coal car come down into here, load the coal by hand, shovel it in, and haul it off. There's a loaded coal car. There's the man over there loading it. Loaded coal car, that's the car just like that, over there. Loaded that, it'll hook up right here, through cable, and they'll pull it out with a mule probably at that time. Or if they had cables and pulleys, they would pull it out of a slope. There's what happens when the roof is getting ready to collapse. You see every one of them timbers are bent, every one of them cracked, and there's a dumb guy right there standing there looking at them like, I don't think I'd be sitting there. And the guy who evidently didn't have a lot of education, because it makes no sense to be there with all of that. If that's already cracked like that, that roof is ready to go. So that's the dangers that we talked about that you had to deal with.
I think it was 1887 was when Pennsylvania enacted the actual coal miner certificate. So you had to actually take the competency test.
Cody was talking about the miners, in order to work in the mines in that time period, they had to get a certificate. We do have a couple copies of mining certificates in our museum that miners actually had to go and take a test to get into. They had to learn how to deal with all this stuff that's there.
We have a collection, this personal collection, but I have over 100 of them listed in different counties all throughout Pennsylvania, but they date back to, I believe, 1887. And when you go take the mine test, this here is actually like one of the books that competency mine exam. There's everything that you had to figure out, from ground pressure, different angles, how you were going to drill your seam, what coal weighed, what your ground weight was. So it wasn't an easy exam. And then to get this test, in the back of the book, you had to pay $1 to take the test, $1 to get the certificate, and $1 to register it. And that was in the 1880s.
So that was trying to make it safer for the miners in 1880. This is still prior to that time. This is when you still had those lamps on their helmets with the light in them. All right, so let's go to the next one. Now, there's the mules down in the thing. This is another early one because they still have the same kind of lamps on. And you notice they all have nice mustaches too. These are all old miners with their mules in the mines, and they kept their mules right in the mines. They stabled them in the mines, and most of them never seen daylight. And if they weren't one of the ones that pulled the cars out, they would just pull the cars to a slope, and then they pull them out with a pulley. These mules never seen the light of day. Okay, we'll go to the next one. And here you see a couple of the mules with the boys riding them and the men riding them as they come up out of the mines. These are the ones that hauled the stuff out of the top of the mines. They were coming out of the shaft, colliery was that Mahoning? Yeah. These mules were wearing leather harnesses and still have their harnesses on. It says that's the way they were harnessed down in the bottom of the mines, and they come out and pull the cars out. So this is the way coal was transported out of the mines back in the day. Now here you see the mule barn. There's their feet in front of them. They're all in a stanchion, just like a cow would be in a cow barn. And they're all in a little section of the mine. I mean, that's where they lived. That's what they did. That was the job of the mule. All right. Now here, this is we're getting more into now. This is the the young boys picking coal. So we're gonna stop there and get back into transportation here into the early part of the mining. So transportation in the early days of mining, the greatest problem was the transportation. Coal was found up here in 1805 in Carbondale, and at the time there were no boats, no canals, no trains, no way to transport it. So the means of transportation at this time was horses and mules. So ox carts, of course, and eventually wagons, and then of course we had stagecoaches for carrying people back and forth. But back then there was nothing. By 1825, a series of roads or turnpikes were being carved out, and there were 2,000 miles of roadway in our state alone were improved roadways. Example of that would be the Drinker Turnpike. Wagons were the major source of transportation for all goods, but the cost was very high. It was approximately cost 10 cents a mile to move something by wagon back then. Example, to haul a ton of merchandise from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia would cost $125 back then, back in the 1820s. 1820s, that's a lot of money. Now we're getting to something Dr. Powell knows a little bit more than anybody else about. Enter William Wirtz, Charles, and Maurice. The Wirtz brothers wandered through the northern coal fields, noting the black stones and charting where they were and where they existed. And one of the guys that helped them was the very first resident of German. His name was Christopher Wilbur. He lived here in that time period, early 1800s, right where Hog Island is, where the confluence of the Rushbrook Creek and the Lackawanna River. He had what was called the 4 Mile Hotel, the first building in German, first resident of German, and he helped the Wirtz brothers locate coal up and down the valley. So now we're getting to where the Wirtz brothers took some samples of this really light, hard surface coal back to Philadelphia to show his brothers. This was William Wirtz. He took it back to show his brothers in Philadelphia and to prove the value of the coal as a fuel. Returning here after not convincing any of his investors, they tried to raft some of the coal down the river. And tried to get it down to the Susquehanna River and raft it down. Now this is early on. But the raft busted apart on rocks in the river and was swamped. So didn't work out. Their venture didn't work. They did finally get a raft to work and get down to Philly, but it was condemned as unusable and as invaluable as the inaccessible wilderness where it came from. That was the words from the people in Philadelphia. So we were in an inaccessible area of wilderness up here. The brothers were not to be deterred. They purchased land up here for 50 cents to $3 an acre, and after 10 years of finally trying to find a way to transport to market their coal, get their coal to Philadelphia, they looked east to New York and the Delaware and Philadelphia, Delaware River to get to Philadelphia and New York. The southern fields, they could fulfill all of their market because of their canals from the Lehigh Valley and down the Susquehanna River. So the Wirtz brothers weren't able to compete with them because they already had a market, they already had a way to get it there, they were already working out of their canals on the Lehigh River and taking everything to Philadelphia. So that's the reason that the Wirtz brothers looked to go east. They wanted to go to the Delaware, and then from the Delaware to the Hudson, and from the Hudson to New York. So the result of their quest to go east resulted in the forming of the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company. In 1823, the legislature of Pennsylvania authorized Maurice Wirtz to improve the navigation of the Lackawaxen River. The Lackawaxen River is right up there in Holly. And in April of the same year, the legislature of New York granted perpetual charter to the president, managers, and company of the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company. The D&H was born. The D&H is what we have here, Delaware and Hudson. All right, they were then ready to construct a canal from the tidewater on the Hudson to the Delaware River, and then up the Delaware to the mouth of the Lackawaxen. Still, doubters existed under the direction of Judge Benjamin Wright, chief engineer of the Erie Canal, Colonel John L. Sullivan, and John B. Mills, a young engineer. They surveyed the route, and in their report of January 7, 1824, they estimated the cost of the project was placed at $1,208,632.95, to be exact. The New York legislature authorized a capital stock of $500,000. Professor Grissom of New York had made a favorable report of the coal mines of the Lackawanna Valley. Access to the rich mines, dense forest of lumber, fertile agriculture lands, and the outlet for a thriving toll traffic gave promise of commercial success. On January 7, 1825, a subscription book for stock was taken out on that day. The Delaware and Hudson Canal Company was authorized to purchase from Maurice Wirtz the rights conferred upon him by the state of Pennsylvania to improve navigation of the Lackawaxen River, and on April 1st, 1825, now that's really early in for this area, the state sanctioned the transfer of such rights. Actual construction of the canal began on July 13th, 1825. On that day, Philip Hone, Honesdale is named after Philip Hone, president of the company, performed the ceremony of breaking ground at the summit level, 40 miles from the Hudson River. In 1826, 2,500 men, 200 teams were employed, and more were wanted. By 1827, boats were floating on the canal, and in October 1821, Hone notified the New York Senate that the canal was completed and the railway from the mines at Carbondale was well on its way. On December 5th, 1828, the first boats carrying coal arrived at the roundout from Honesdale. There were 11 boats in the squadron, each laden with 10 tons of anthracite. The first cargo of the company's Lackawanna anthracite arrived in the city of New York by the sloop Toleration 5 days later. So that's when the first coal from Carbondale ended up in New York. While the gravity railroad was being completed, the coal from Carbondale was transported by 20 to 30 teams from the mines to the canal wharf at a cost of $2.25 to $2.75 a ton. The canal was the largest private enterprise undertaken on the American continent up to that time. That's pretty impressive for the Carbondale area. If you want to flip to another slide to see what's there. All right, we're getting a little bit later on now. The canal was 108 miles long, 32 to 36 feet wide, with a minimum depth of 4 foot of water. The boats used could carry more than 30 tons of coal. Coal was delivered to New York and New England. It fueled our industrial supremacy for nearly 3/4 of a century. The first year of operation, 7,000 tons of coal passed through the series of locks to make their ascent and descent from Honesdale to New York. In 1833, more than 110,000 tons were transported. By 1840, it had increased to 148,000 tons, plus 25,000 tons of other merchandise, which would be lumber, food, supplies, whatever else they could transport from our area and sell in New York. Steamboats were slowly sold on the use of coal to propel the steamboats. So now coal was needed for another means of transportation. The locks were rebuilt on a larger scale to allow boats to carry 95 tons at a time. In 1856, 70,000 tons of general merchandise and 1,800,000 feet of lumber were carried on through that canal system and out to New York. From 1829 to 1899, the D&H Canal was a dominant factor in the development of mines in the Lackawanna and Wyoming Valley. By 1899, 1898, the cost of the canal was covered already. They paid for it. But now the railroad would make the canal obsolete by that time, 1898. Now you're talking rail transportation, and now the canal is now obsolete by 1898. The D&H Canal Company was sold from Honesdale to Roundup for $10,000 to a Mr. S.D. Cokendale, president of the Cornell Steamboat Company. Let's see. All right, so now some coal facts. So let's go to it. This slide here, this is what happened around, you're talking 1920s and 1930s, when they started to go in and rob pillars from the mines. And when they started to rob pillars from the mines started to collapse. And we had a lot of them here in the 1830s, 40s, all the way up to the 1930s in Germany, where we had houses collapse, complete blocks collapse. So, you know, we didn't have them back in the 1830s and 1930s, but 1830s we didn't have coal here yet. But this is somewhere around that time period where you see the wooden houses already, so you're already talking probably the 1920s when something like this is happening. Here you see the timber, the bent timbers where they keep shoring up with more timbers, and every time you see all the timbers laying here that they would bring in on cars and bring down and keep supporting that roof. That's a stone ceiling, and all these cracked timbers, they'd bring in new timbers and place them so that they could keep going working in the mines. Here you see one of the old lanterns on a young boy with his mule. He'd have to go down in the mines and bring the mules out. Okay. Okay. This is the picture of the DuPont gelatin. It had 40% strength. This was down from the DuPont powder mills, which was formed in 1864 right here in Germany. They had, I think, 7 explosions. Some of them were felt or heard as far as Montrose from here, from the explosions. Men were killed, of course. Go to the next one. DuPont powder mills, DuPont company owned them. There were 2 of them. That's a better picture of it. Now this is in our museum. This is part of our museum, so it gives you a little bit of idea of what you're going to see when you come into it. We have a big mine up there. And see this wooden shovel here? That is what they used in the powder mills to move the powder, the black powder, because any metal shovel would cause a spark and cause an explosion. So this is what they would use, would be a wooden shovel to move their powder around in the mines. You see the carbide lamps here, you see some of the old lanterns here. These are ones that Cody has donated to us. You see one of the lunch pails that has D&H on the top of it. This is a replica right here that our second president of the Historical Society, who just passed a few years back, Walter Avery, built by hand. That is an exact replica of the mine in Germany. That's what it looked like back in the day. Go to the next one. There's another better picture of the box from the DuPont explosives, telling you a little bit about it. 25 pounds in that box. There is the breaker number 2. That was 1860. That was the second breaker. And you see it was John German's breaker in Gibsonburg, Pennsylvania. Breaker number 2. Breaker number 1 was built in 1860. First shaft was sunk by Chittenden. And 1857 they sunk the shaft, but they didn't really own it, didn't do much with it. And Judge Gibson from Philadelphia came up and purchased or leased the mine and tried to make some money off the mines, but didn't really do very well. But in 1860, the second breaker, this is number 2, so we had 2 breakers by 1860 in German. And John German owned it by that time and worked the mines. He got here, this was 1860 was when it was built, but John German came here in 1868 or 69 and took over the mines from Gibson. And he made a contract for 1 million tons of coal and fulfilled that contract the first year of operation in 1869, 69, 70. So that would be about the time that German was chartered as a borough, 1870. 1 million tons the very first year of operation in German. Okay.
So was German used to be called Gibsonburg?
German was called 4 Mile Point when Christopher Wilbur lived here because it was 4 miles from Carbondale. He helped the Wirtz brothers. Carbondale was starting to become a settlement somewhere around there in the 1818s, 1820s. Blakely Township, there was a community in Blakely, 4 miles from there was German, so we were 4 Mile Point, considered 4 Mile Point. So that would have been in the 1818s, 1820s. And then in around the early 1830s, Captain Daniel Bacon came here, realized that they were starting the gravity railroad in the 1826, I believe, and they needed lumber for the rails, to build the rails. So he came here and built 2 sawmills, one in Lackawanna, both of them in the Lackawanna River. One was called the Keystone Sawmill. One was approximately where the St. James Church is in the river, and one was a little bit lower. So he built 2 sawmills and he floated all the lumber down river to those sawmills, and then he took the lumber by wagons. He had 10 teams of horses and wagons and hauled the lumber to build the gravity railroad. So Captain Daniel Bacon, so German was then called Baconville in the 1830s. So we were Baconville, and I'm trying very hard to get a bacon company to donate some money to have a bacon fest in German to bring some money to recognize German as Baconville. I've contacted them and I have not heard from them, so I'm going to have to find a connection somewhere. And then German was called Rushdale after Captain Bacon left. He had a big farm. Christopher Wilbur owned 330 some odd acres of land in Carbondale Township, Blakely Township / Carbondale Township was to the north of Rushbrook Creek. Blakely Township was to the south of Rushbrook Creek. So Christopher Wilbur owned some land in Blakely Township, some land in Carbondale Township. Captain Daniel Bacon owned 380 some acres of land in all of Blakely Township. He owned everything from Christopher Wilbur's property south down to from that mountain to the other side over in East German. He didn't mine coal, he mined timber. He cut all the trees, they built homes. He lived on the corner of Bacon Street and Washington Avenue, right on the very corner. There's a house there now, but it's not the original one that Mrs. Bacon lived in. They had some other little houses for his workers, some barns and shack, and he had a farm. So he farmed but the stories that you read in the newspapers in the 1840s say that there was no trees to be found because Captain Bacon cut them all down to get them up to there. So he transported everything by wagon to Carbondale for the rails. So after he left and went back, he went to New York City, back to live in New York City. When he left, they didn't want to call it Baconville anymore because he was gone, so they named the town Rushdale and named it after the rushing creek that was here. That was one of the first things that was mentioned by early trappers who came through here. They talked about the beautiful colorful fish in the rushing creek. So it was called Rushdale. And it was also called, the East German side was called Random. So it was Rushdale and Random all through the 1840s, all the way up until the 1850s. And then when Gibson came here in early 1860s and started make these mines work, because 1860 was the first breaker. So he was here late 1850s, early 1860s. They named it Gibsonburg. So German was Gibsonburg up until 1874, when John German made German famous. That's when there were 4,000 people living here and multiple businesses, 7 churches, 2 glass companies, all kinds of businesses in German. They said it was the most thriving community in the Lackawanna Valley at that time. And in 1874, they named it German. They started with the D&H Railroad Station in East German. They named it German Station. And then the people of German decided they wanted to change the name, so 1874 they changed the name to German. All right, so we'll go to the next slide in there, because we're getting close to the end here. This is one of the liquid pails that they would carry in the mines. This is also in our museum, and you see a picture. This up here, up on the top, is a picture donated by Joanne Wilson of the Lackawanna coal mine. So that is a big picture that is also in our museum. All right, and flip that. This is one of the lanterns that you'll see over there, also there with the other side of the picture. Flip that again. That's in our museum as well. The coal pail, what you see here, that is in our museum. Keep going, one more. That's the coal car. We'll go to the next one. This is the D&H. I took a picture of these here, so you'll know this is the D&H coal company. This came out of this is the Powderly Colliery. That's what the breaker looked like. The Powderly Hudson Coal Company owned that too. That would be in the 1940s. Here you see the miner working with his big bar, and there was a bar like that here that you were using. It was not laying on the ground, but we had to run it down in there. And he's doing the same thing. This is the boss. He's in there checking the gas in the mines and moving the coals. There, now you see more modern. This has got the light on the helmet. He's got goggles on. He's got an electric drill. They now have electricity down into the mines, and he's working the same thing that was doing, but he's drilling into the mines with the new drill. Now this machine here, what they did was they would get on their hands and knees and push this on the very base of the coal before they blasted the coal, so that it wouldn't go, it would come straight out. That's at the very bottom of the coal that was there. They would run that right along the bottom, break that in, so when they blasted it, it would come out level and come out so that they could run a rail into and keep going with a rail in a level area. This is right after a blast. This is right after they dynamited. If you look here, you'll see the rail and the rail here. That's the original rail that came in before they made the blast. So they drilled and blasted way in the back, and then they flipped all that coal out. So they'll bring the coal car now down to this point here, and then they'll hand load all that coal in the car, and they'll clean it all back all the way to the next phase, and then they'll drill again and blast again. Now here you see how low this is with one timber. It's all holding that up. And there are guys loading that coal car by hand, one by one, taking it, and that coal car is going out that way. Now this is a more modern picture. This would be about 1920s. This is a shaft, and it could be the one in Oliphant, because the one in Oliphant was like this. And there's a shaft going this way and a shaft going that way. But you see how nice and smooth they made those with blocks and everything else. This is a more modern mine shaft right there. Now this is when they had electricity in the mines, and people were electrocuted with these wires. Kids and miners were electrocuted by touching the rail and touching the wires in the mines. These were electrified cars hauling the coal out. Now you see the guy driving it right here, and he's pulling all that, and you see the guy standing on the side of it. That's how people were hurt in the mines. Now here's the coal cars being loaded, coming up out of the mines and being loaded with coal. That's the same coal cars you see right there. That's the same type that we're coming out of the mines with a load of coal in them.
I'll give you a minute, okay?
All right, one more. Now this is more modern. This is carried the coal right across the street of a road. This went all the way from one mine. This could have been like the mine in Mayfield, the Glendale mine, that took the mine from the right side of the Lackawanna River and brought it out across the river and across Main Street to where they would load it in the coal cars where the O&W track went up over the in through Mayfield. So all that coal would go on a conveyor after it was cleaned and separated. Now this is shakers. This is where the coal would come down in and get broken up here. These things would vibrate and break up the coal. And I was always wondered what these were until I seen that picture, because I had these for a long time. That these are what were in those spikes, and they would be pounded down into that there, and then they would just vibrate, and the coal would hit these and break up into smaller pieces to be sorted and sent to market. Because they must have had 10 different types of coal, from pea to chestnut and all that other stuff, and they would get it divided into whatever size they wanted to ship to market. This is a cone, and this would circle and water would come into it, and the coal was real light, so the coal would stay in the water, and it'd come out here, and it'd come down into where those things would break it up. You see them coming down. And then all the stone that was heavy would go through the water and down to the bottom and be discharged down the bottom. So only the good anthracite coal would come out. This is more modern. This would be in the 1940s. And there's the shaker with the screens. You see the screens up in here that would screen all the different types of coal into different sizes, so people would have their choice of coal, whatever they wanted. And this is a more modern, this is what made the canal go out of business, was the trains. Now this is the types of trains you see down at Steamtown with long sometimes 100 coal cars at a time being pulled. This is the more modern strip mine. This is the Fallbrook stripping and Powderly Colliery. This is the strip mines. You can see the big drag lines in there digging. You see the steam coming out. This is where the big mine fires were in Carbondale, and we had them in Oliphant. This is more modern with the strip mines with the Euclids hauling the coal out. And that's a D&H, that's just a replica of that Hudson Coal Company. It's from the book. Now this is a picture I took of the D&H mines in the 1940s. And you see it starts all the way up here in Forest City, where we talked about early on where the coal started, coming down through here into Carbondale, Powderly, German, Archibald, Oliphant, Blakely. Go to the next one. And then you see it goes from Oliphant, Blakely down into Scranton to the Marvin. There's the Marvin Colliery there. There's the county line into there. And then go down into Wilkes-Barre. There's the Laughlin Colliery, and I can't read that from here, but Balsamwood Colliery, and then down all the way down to Plymouth. This is all what was owned by the D&H Coal Company. This was injury prevention and first aid. Of course, I had to say a little bit about this in this presentation because of German being the birthplace of first aid. Hudson Coal Company, 1899, October 25th, is when the first meeting was with Dr. Matthew Shields. They met in the Windsor, which was then the Farmers Hotel, and they formed a group of miners that wanted to do something about preventing injuries, or not preventing injuries, but taking care of people that were injured in the mine, because back in the day, a doctor would have to hear a siren blown by a steam whistle in the mine to let him know there were injured workers in the mines, and he would have to go out, hitch up the team of horses to his Black Maria wagon, which was his hearse and his way to get people to the hospitals, which were in the area, which I think at that time was only in Carbondale. And by the time he would get there, people that were injured even worse, or bleeding to death. So the miners wanted to learn how to treat wounds, put splints on, stop bleeding, and different things. So they started forming a first aid team. So we go to the next one on that. And this is a 50th anniversary of some of these were the original miners in that first aid team. We have a copy that I bought from England of the book from 1899 from England that they used. John Hogarth's father met with his brother in England and got a copy of that book that they used in England during the mines. And over there they had first aid teams. We didn't have them here. So he went and got a copy of their first aid manual, brought it back here. Dr. Shields took it and adapted it to what was more modern at the time. And he got all the credit for doing the first aid mining. And then the Red Cross picked it up, took it, and traveled across the country with railroad cars with the first aid movement. And it was all started here in Germany. And that was 1899, so that was a little bit later. And I did learn that my grandfather was part of the Union mine strikers and was arrested for something to do with a mine strike in German when Mitchell was here, who was his statue down in Scranton. He was the big Union guy, and he was here and spoke from the porch of the Windsor Hotel to the miners, and at that time there was a lot of striking going on, and the scabs were working the mines and everything else. And my grandfather got in a confrontation with somebody and ended up being arrested for it. But this is what we have down here. This is the annual report from 1949 of the Delaware and Hudson Company. And here you see the different periods of times with the trains and what they look like. All the way back up, I think the next slide shows the Stourbridge Lion on the top. Yeah, there it is, 1829. And then 1853 would have been the next one. And this is the 1951, for the year ending 1951. So these are copies that we've acquired. I think we're almost done with slides. There shows you the canal. That's the canal that went down the Hudson River, and they were giving people rides in the canal boats. All right, I think we're almost done with slides. And I don't even know what that one is. I don't know if that has to be rotated, I think. 'Cause I can't even see it. Yeah, I don't know if you can rotate that, but that's a train hauling coal and coal cars coming out. Let's see if we get rid of that one, because I
don't want to try to rotate it.
And that's another one the same way. I don't know why they got turned. It must have been the way I took the picture. That's the inside of a mine and the coal car's coming out. Just flip it. We don't have to rotate it. We're almost finished. And this is just a little bit of caption of what was in that book that was passed around. This is the railroad was 13 miles long, built up over the Music Mountain, joining the canal. This is about the Gravity Railroad. This went at its western terminus of the mine in Carbondale. The railroad is a system of planes and inclines operated by steam-powered rope, hauling up the steep descent from Carbondale to Rick's Gap, and then by horses on a moderate grade to Holmesdale. And it was from that name called the Gravity Railroad. And that the company's trail lines and operations eventually grew to their present size, this is taken around the 1940s. And this talks a little bit about the Gravity Railroad. It's all in that book on the mines that I passed around. And that's just more about the early growth of the Gravity Railroad. That's all in that book, and we'll have a copy of that in our museum. And the same thing, this is all in that book, so I'm not even going to talk about it, but there's 23 miles of railroad by 1830. I think we talked about all of this. 2,800 miles were completed, put into operation. This is all about the canal, stuff that we went over already. And I think that's the last picture of it. the early rail. I think that's the last one. But that's just early, just pictures of the rest. So just click through them and see if there's anything else there. As we're just about done here, these are some of the early miners with their helmets on. More of them shoveling the coal after a blast, shoveling the coal with the timbers. You see the timbers holding up the roof. Here's another copy of that same machine digging out, and the coal cars coming out of the electrified. This is the steam coming out of the mines. You can see it in the background, and that's a drag line. That's the way they mine coal later in the. And this is the last slide, and this is what how they delivered the coal. This is how they took the coal, loaded it into the old trucks, and they were scissor lift trucks that hauled the coal into your house. And then we use the coal pail, and that's pretty much the end of that presentation. I think there's more here, but I'm not going to bore any more with just little facts and figures.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure.
There was a time I went to, I think it was in Jim Thorpe, but they had something like this, but without the end on, and it was just a really big, heavy one of these things. And the guy, supposedly is what they said, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what they said. The guy would put it over his shoulder and hold it like this while he has one of those little lights. And the other guy would stand there and swing the sledgehammer
And hit it.
and they would make, and like hit the end of it. And then this guy would turn it a quarter turn and this guy would hit the end of it. And that's how they would make holes to go into the ceiling. And I thought, that's when men were men. Because that took a man to do that work. I'll never forget that.
He's absolutely true. They would have the same thing as that, and it would be a lot thicker, and they would just stand like this and brace it on their shoulder and hold it with two hands into the ceiling so that they could blast the ceiling if they weren't up to the solid rock yet, and they still had coal above them. And that guy would stand behind them, and I have a piece of that sledgehammer I just got. A friend of mine moved when he went to school with me. He's a couple years behind me. Bought a house in Carbondale Township, and in the basement was a bunch of pails of a lot of tools. And one of them big sledgehammer heads was in there, and some of these tools were in there. So we do have more now. But he got all of this stuff out of a home in Carbondale Township. And I wish I could have got into that home because he had a Wurlitzer record player, one of the Victrolas record player, the one you crank up. It stood up about this high, and you open the door to make the sound come out of the speakers a little bit louder. He got it. He found it in that house when he moved into the house. So
Was that big bar that Doug was talking about, was that called a star grill?
well, we have Star.
You turn it, you turn it.
Yeah, that could have been where the name Star Drill came from, but we have Star Drills now, so that could have been where that was originated. I don't know if that was called the Star Drill. It's very possible. Does anybody have any questions?
When can we see the museum?
Well, you can see the museum anytime I'm available if you want to come and take a look at it. It's not finished yet. We don't have an occupancy permit, so we're not in it. I was hoping to be open by this time, but it's kind of hard to get everything done when you're trying to work a couple days and then work over there a couple days and then go back, and it takes a lot longer than I thought it was going to take to do it because it's almost there. We have the glass cases on one side all complete and cleaned and filled. We have 2 rooms completely done. We have to put some shelves up and put some furniture in place, and they'll be done, the 2 entrance rooms. We have to take out a section of ceiling in the entranceway that was going across it, so we can open it up so you can see the steep part of the ceiling, the signs and the lights hanging when you come in the entrance. And I can't do that until the electrician finishes putting a new line in, and then we have to we're going to use that to plug in the Smolacone plumbing sign and the hanging light. We have one of them old green lights that used to hang from the street lights. So we're going to have that hung. So once that's finished, we should be able to get the other side of the building done. So I think it's probably going to be a couple of months yet. but I wanted to have a grand opening by the end of September, but it's never gonna happen, so I'm thinking maybe the end of October we should be close. But you can come and see it anytime. All you have to do is get on Facebook, go to the German Historical Society, message me, and I can let you come in and take a look at it. But I'd like to have everybody come for a grand opening. Yeah? Yeah.
I have a question about the mines in Germany. When did the last mine close in Germany?
1945.
Wow, that early?
45. We were one of the first mines that closed. John German started it so early and took out so much coal early that they pretty much ran out of good coal. There were still more places they could have went and maybe found some more, but it would not be cost effective for the Hudson Coal Company to do that when they had so many other mines that were still working that started later, like the Oliphant Breaker and Marvin down in Scranton, some of them other mines that were still producing good coal. So the German was one of the earlier ones to shut down. Now, we had the German breaker right where Rapid Pallet is. Right up beyond it, just before the Casey Highway, was the second breaker, which was that other picture that we showed you. Going out of Rushbrook Street, on the left-hand side of the mountain was the West Mountain Coal Company. On the right-hand side, you see some little buildings on the right of the Rushbrook Creek. That was the dynamite house and the office for the West Mountain Coal Company. And on the top of that mountain is the slope that's still there. The mine slope is still there, the entrance is still there, and you can follow the little pathway where the rails came out and came down the mountain. They would drop their coal off out of the breaker and bring it on horses and come down to Rushbrook Street, down to Main Street, and right to the railroad, and they would dump it into railroad cars right there off of Main Street. That's from the West Mountain Coal Company. So there was a breaker there, a breaker here, a breaker there, and Edgerton was up farther, so that's 4. Down at the Y at the end of German, you go to the left and go down where Art Wilson's house was. Directly across from that, there's a car wash there, and just to the left of that was a breaker. And you go down the other way on the Y and over the hill from the Highlands. On the right-hand side, there was a breaker there. You go to Mayfield, and you drive up Mayfield to where the T&R service station is, and there was a breaker on the other side of the river, and that came out across the road. You drive up through by the bowling alley and under the railroad tracks, and the Hourly breaker was right there. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 collieries, 8 breakers within a mile of German. Imagine how much coal came out of here.
Yeah, because I live in Dixon City, and I think the last mine closed in 1954, I think.
Yeah, they've still mined all the way up into the 50s. Like when I was a kid, I can remember as a little boy in the 60s driving through Carbondale, and they were still mining, strip mining coal, and they had the gigantic mine fire at the time. And I don't know how it started. Maybe Dr. Powell can enlighten us there if he knows how it started. But that mine, that sulfur smell and that glow at night when you drive up there at night with that mine fire burning was unbelievable. And the size of the pit that was there, and you could see trucks down in there that were Euclids that would be humongous trucks, and they looked like little ants in the hole. That's how deep that hole was and how big that hole was. So they were still mining coal here in the early 1960s. And they were strip mining up in the mountains because we would play on all of the drag lines that were up there when we were kids. So they were still in the 1960s mining coal around there. And today there's still a mine in Archibald that the mine company from down in Pittston was still working on up until last year, and another company just bought it, and they're still mining coal in Archibald.
Bruce, I did bring a map too for people that are familiar with Carbondale now. So I got a map of 1918 Carbondale before the mine fire started in the late 30s, early 40s, just to see. So I'm trying to So as down here you can see, that's all the railroad tracks. And there was two turntable roundhouses and carved out one time. You come over further this way, that whole section over in here, where he's at, that was all the roads where the current high school is,
That's where
and
the
Weiss Ames Plaza.
That's where the mine fire was.
That all was houses, businesses, everything, and then once that started, they did the buyout, and then tore all that down to clear it out. And there's a couple pictures over there. I brought postcards of the mine fire, and then even the mine cave-ins still happen. And they just had one happen, I believe it was the beginning of this year, over on the west side out in Fallbrook Street, where a person's house started to collapse into the mine. So it's still happening today.
We had mine collapse on Main Street. We had 3 of them right down the road on this block. Well, since I've been living, we had 3 different times that the mines have dropped. In the 1930s, we had a whole block and a half of homes drop on Jefferson Avenue and the 600 and 700 blocks, where houses, people, you could see that people, their houses were tipped into the mines, and they had to rescue the people out of the houses. And that was in the 1930s and 40s. So that was still happening then. But these mines on Main Street, I remember as a kid, them closing the road to fill in the mines on Main Street, right by where Noldies lived on Main Street. Anybody else have any questions or
You know where the
anything?
bandstand was?
On this side of the road, yeah?
Well, that caved in. And Eddie Mellon's backyard, that caved in.
Well, there is a shaft, there's a mine shaft right down from behind here, right alongside the river coming into this way. There is still a shaft there that's covered over now, but there's still a shaft there that comes in underneath Main Street, which would come underneath where he was just talking down the road here. There used to be a bandstand where German, there's a house there now, but Mellon's lived right next to it. That's where it caved in, but that's approximately where that shaft comes in. And if you remember coming down Route 6 and into Einen, right where the plaza is at the light, there was always an air shaft there. We used to stop and roll our windows down all the time to get the cold air blowing in the car. When you'd stop there, it would blow right out of the side of the mountain, and they finally barred that up and then closed it all up. There's another one just like that where the PP&L power plant is up on the mountain. There's one on the back side of the PP&L plant with the bars and everything. That it's still there. You could still squeeze through those bars and get down into the mines.
Yeah, I have 2 things too. So this year, they sell them over at the Canal Park in Homestead, Lot 31, but this is basically a miniature model they sell of what canal boats would have looked like.
That's the Dunham boats that they use on the canals.
And they would have had, on each side of the canals, they didn't have any type of propeller, no motor. So actually on the bridges of the canal, they would have mules pull this down to the next lock to raise, and they would haul with mules all the way to New York, and then the opposite back. And then when Bruce was talking about the, when they would comb clean all the coal, and the rock would stay at the top, this was predated that, and this was a Bume scale. So it would scale and measure out the difference of the coal oil and the actual coal to give you the degree of how clean the coal was. And this is from Carbondale from 1864.
And there's a picture in that book of a guy sitting at a table doing that, in that book that I passed around. Cody's an unbelievable knowledge and collector for a young man to have the knowledge that he has of he loves the history of coal mining and the railroads. He's one of the best around. He buys everything and anything he can find, and he does a lot of research. He really knows his stuff.
Yeah, I got into it after basically my grandparents died, and I'm able to trace back my heritage back to when they built the D&H Canal. My family had a farm over off of Keens Lake. And the whole family, that side, my father's side, worked all the D&H. My mother's whole side all worked the O&W up until it closed. My grandfather retired from the D&H after they became Canadian CP Rail, Canadian Pacific after the merger. So from the beginning to the end of the D&H, my family goes back, so that's why I'm kind of interested in all that. And family was also in all the mines too.
I have a picture of one of my uncles in one of the big trains on my grandmother's side. He was one of the engineers on one of the trains. So I go back to Holland, Nepal. My grandfather worked in the mines here in Germany. So my grandfather was a miner, and my other great uncle on the other side was one of the railroad guys on the rail. So I have the same kind of interest that, you know, our family didn't come here until 1870, so, you know, they came here to work the mines. That's what they came here for. So German, Carbondale, Upper Valley was one of the largest Welsh populations in the country. They all came here to teach the miners how to work the mines and to work the mines. And as a member of the St. David Society, we always talk about the early history of the mines, and Dr. Powell's very well versed in that. He's he's past president of the St. David Society as well as I am, and we very well knowledgeable about the history of the Welsh population in Germany. The museum that we're building is inside of the Welsh Congregational Church that was here in 1884. That's what we're refinishing. We're making it into a museum. It has the church windows, the original church. The windows that are now are not original on the sides, but they are in the same place where the original church windows were. And the front two windows are exactly where the church windows were in that building in 1884. So we're trying to keep the history of the building alive. Now we're doing it a little commercial now. We have the beef sticks for sale over on the table. That's what's paying the mortgage on the building that we bought. We took a $15,000 mortgage down, put $5,000 down, and we're down to less than $3,000 left of paying for that building, just selling beef sticks. We also sell coins, postcards, and we're going to have some books for sale when the museum's open. We're possibly thinking of doing a bus trip to West Point, and if that comes up, we'll have that on our Facebook page. German Borough has just added, we're selling bricks for the entranceway to the museum, and the brick, we've already sold over 40 bricks, so we're well on our way to being able to get the entranceway finished with bricks going in. I even have a guy from New York State that happens to be a mason and a friend of mine. I met him at the Watkins Glen racetrack. He spent $100 and bought a brick with just his name on it. He has no connection to German whatsoever, but he wanted to support the museum. So